Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our forums are free and open to the public and occur most Sundays at noon. We're located at 4700 Grover Avenue. We encourage you to attend. Our church mission and our Public Affairs Forum mission is to nurture the mind and the spirit and to serve social justice. And now, Dale Beulah, one of our forum committee members, is going to introduce today's exciting speaker. Dale?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. Today we have Zach Baumer, who's going to do his presentation with us today. He manages the Austin Climate Protection Program in the City of Austin's Office of Sustainability, where he oversees the implementation of climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies around the City of Austin. Prior to his work in the city, he spent 10 years working as an environmental consultant. He was primarily assisting large industrial clients with environmental data management. He has an MBA from Presidio Graduate School and an undergraduate degree in chemistry and chemical engineering from Purdue University. And after we finish today, we hope you'll join us across the parking lot at the credit union and view a lot of low-emission, zero-emission vehicles, part of our Spring into Action emphasis here at the church with environmental activities throughout the month. So, Zach Baumer, come on and kick us off.
Great. Thank you very much, Dale. Thanks for organizing this and inviting me to participate. I'm excited to be here and share some interesting and good information about climate change in the City of Austin and action that everybody can participate in. So thank you so much for coming. I have about 30 slides or so that I'll sort of go through and talk about different issues, and then I'm excited to answer questions and discuss any topics with the audience. So specifically today I'm going to talk about the Austin Community Climate Plan, which is a plan that's just coming to sort of completion and fruition and hopefully presentation to our Austin City Council here within the next couple months. And I'm going to specifically focus on transportation of vehicles because that's kind of the theme of the day. So there are a lot of different things to cover when we're talking about climate change, so I'm going to try to stay focused on one specific area here today. It should be noted that the creation of this plan has been a very collaborative process, not only Office of Sustainability from the City of Austin leading, but also Austin Energy, the Austin Transportation Department, Austin Resource Recovery, and many, many very active and excited and helpful residents from the community that have volunteered their time through technical advisor groups and through our steering committee to really create this body of work. So what I'm going to cover today is first, why should we have a community climate plan? Then our approach and the plan development process that we've gone through to create this Austin Community Climate Plan. Then specifically talk about the transportation strategies within the plan. Then I'll talk a little bit about electric vehicles and the Austin Energy electric vehicle programs that they have going on right now. Just a little bit about the city vehicle fleet. The city operates a lot of vehicles just to run business and deliver services for the city. And then finally, kind of the conclusion and next steps for where this whole effort's going forward from here. So, first, why develop a community climate plan? Climate change is real. It's happening. The emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere over the last 150 years has caused those gases to accumulate, and they're causing instability in the climate. But it's interesting when you think about climate change, many many times what you think about and what you hear on the news is 2 degrees centigrade warming or sea level rise or hurricanes. And it very quickly becomes this amorphous kind of far and away complicated issue. The important thing to note, though, is that climate change is not only affecting weather patterns and temperatures and precipitation globally, but also will be affecting us right here in Austin. So this would be a whole separate presentation, but there's been a lot of work done by scientists, not only at the national level, but also then zeroing in on Austin and trying to predict what would future trends for precipitation and temperature be for the Austin area. Because we're all connected in this regional and global system, but how things actually affect us here on the ground in our day-to-day lives over the next 50, 100 years makes it a lot more tangible and a lot easier for everybody to imagine really what climate change is going to mean. So the 2 pictures up here are just 2 examples of likely what we are likely to see more of. The top one is the Onion Creek flood that occurred in 2013, and then the bottom one is the Bastrop fires that occurred in 2011. So scientists are projecting that our precipitation in the Austin area, the averages are likely about to stay the same, but we're likely to have more extreme events of precipitation interspersed further throughout the year. So if we get around 32 inches of rain a year, instead of having 30 days of 1 inch of rain, we may only have 6 storms, but 5 inches of rain each time. So that naturally will cause more flooding. The other thing is that when you have rain interspersed with long periods of dry in between, it naturally leads to more drought-like conditions. When you pair that with projections for temperature, the bottom chart here, you can't see it very well, but on the bottom right, it's projected that right now when we imagine hot summers, 2011 is what comes to mind. 90 days over 100 degrees throughout the summer, almost no rainfall, and that was scary and that was hot, and it caused lots of different issues with the lakes, with our trees, with our ecosystems, with our energy usage in our homes and buildings. It's projected that by the end of the century, 2011 is likely to just be the average. So we're likely to see more and more and more extreme summertime temperatures of over 100 degrees. So climate change is happening. It's being driven by greenhouse gas emissions, so we need to act. We need to take action to reduce emissions, but then also prepare to adapt to these changes. So what's the city doing about reducing greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change? So in 2007, many of you have probably referred to as the Austin Climate Protection Plan. That was passed by Mayor Will Wynn in our city council. It had 5 major focus areas to reduce emissions in the Austin community. One of those areas, and the one you hear about the most, is things that affect Austin energy in our generation mix of electricity. One of the parts of the plan was called community planning, where a community climate plan was supposed to be developed, and we were supposed to figure out where emissions came from. This has been a long, complicated process to create a plan like this, so we're only now actually delivering on that promise from 2007. The thing that pushed us along was in April of last year, so almost a year ago right now. The Austin City Council passed a resolution that set forth this target. So that was a really important thing, to have a target and the thing that we were shooting for. So they established this goal of net zero community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So most of this presentation is going to be about what does that goal mean, where do the emissions come from, and what are the strategies and actions we would implement in order to actually be a community with net zero greenhouse gas emissions in 35 years. So the number one thing that we had to do was figure out where the emissions come from. So this is a direct emissions inventory, so basically just measuring what are the emissions associated with our day-to-day activities. So this morning, many of us woke up, turned on a light, turned on the air conditioning or the heat, got coffee, got in your car, drove somewhere, threw something away. Throughout that process, all of those activities are what contributes to greenhouse gas emissions in our community. So The estimate for 2010 was about 14 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that was emitted from all of the activities within the boundary of Travis County. So that's every single one of us doing all that we do throughout the whole year. Over 50% of those emissions come from using electricity and using natural gas to heat water and heat homes. About 35% of that, transportation and mobile sources, so all of the driving, every single car, every single vehicle, every single truck moving around. And then the smaller portion there is landfills, wastewater treatment, and then some process and fugitive emissions from some industrial activities. So the major things, and if you've ever done your carbon footprint before, you've realized that most of the emissions come from using electricity and heat and to heat or cool your home and buildings, and then moving around in your vehicle. So today, mostly I'm going to talk about transportation and mobile sources. So another thing to consider, this one's kind of hard to see. The other thing to consider is when we're diving into transportation and trying to understand how would you reduce emissions from transportation, we've got to figure out what kind of vehicles and how much of that vehicle use is creating those emissions. So this data comes from the Texas Transportation Institute, which is at Texas A&M University. They work with TxDOT, which is the Texas Department of Transportation, to do analysis on our roadways and vehicle counts and try to figure out how many vehicles are moving around our community. The only thing, you can actually probably see it from here. If you total up the red and the green, those are single passenger vehicles and trucks. So those are just normal cars and trucks that we see on the road. So over 80% of the emissions that are coming from transportation sources in Austin are just coming from regular cars and trucks. You know, you may see a garbage truck or see, an 18-wheeler and think that those are major contributors to the problem. And while they do emit, I think it's 10 to 20% of the emissions, it's relatively small when you compare to the hundreds of thousands of cars and trucks that are out there, because everybody's got to get around. So what does net zero greenhouse gas emissions mean? So starting at the very beginning, it basically means that right now, this chart, all these bars stacked up is that emissions inventory in 2010. The dotted line is if we do nothing, if we don't implement programs to reduce emissions, if we don't buy electric cars, use renewable energy, emissions will just be projected to grow. Our population's projected to grow, and if we don't implement projects and programs to reduce those emissions, there's no reason to think that they're going to just go down on their own. So action's going to have to be taken in order for us to reverse that trend and to basically reduce the emissions. So over time, the goal that's been, I guess the definition that's been agreed upon by the folks participating in this process is at least 90% of reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. So basically in 35 years, going from over 14 million metric tons down to less than 1 million metric tons. So that's a big change, and that would mean a lot of things for all of us in our daily lives. Another way to think about it is in terms of those different emission sources. So what does net zero in 2050 mean? It would basically mean not using fossil fuel for electricity or heating. So using renewable energy to fulfill all of our lighting needs, all of our cooling needs, all of our heating needs. So that's a big switch from right now. Right now we use power plants, large fossil fuel powered power plants to provide most of the electricity. So that's a big change. The second one, with materials management, landfills would have to capture and destroy all the emissions, as well as a major diversion and reuse of materials in our community, so less and less new stuff being created, more and more reuse of things, and especially organic materials like food scraps being kept out of landfills. So much more and more composting, reusing of those materials. In terms of transportation, it would equal a major reduction in vehicle miles traveled, and then a major switch to active, renewably powered, and public transportation. So basically, less driving just in general, and then the driving that has to occur powered by renewable energy and or public transportation. So when we say reducing vehicle miles, it means just either not taking the trip or walking or biking or something where you're not using a vehicle that uses energy. Another thing that we considered when creating this citywide plan is considering the diversity of individuals and people that make up our community. We realize that we're not all the same. Older Older members of the community have much different lives than people in college. People with high incomes make a lot different choices than people with low incomes. Small businesses do things very differently than large businesses. So we created a large section of this plan that focuses on, so when we say moving to all of these things, using 100% renewable energy, not driving as much, how would that affect all of the people in our community? Because we realize that the same solutions aren't going to fit everyone. Buying a brand new electric car tomorrow doesn't work for everybody in the Austin area. Putting solar panels on your house works for a lot of people, doesn't work for some people. So there's going to have to be solutions that fit for everybody in our community, and we think that there is opportunity in engaging the whole community. This isn't just for a certain subset of Austinites. The other thing that we thought a lot about when working through this planning process was not everybody, I've used the word greenhouse gas emission and carbon dioxide equivalent a lot in the last 10 minutes. A lot of people don't know what that means, and a lot of people don't really care what that means. It doesn't really resonate with people. There's carbon dioxide floating around this room right now. I've never seen it. We're never going to see it. It's an invisible, colorless, tasteless gas. So it's hard to connect to people when you're talking about trying to reduce tons of emissions. So we make a lot of connection in this plan to saving money, reduce air pollution, energy security, thriving economy, less traffic, safer streets, protecting and enhanced ecosystems, less water use, all the actions that are proposed in this planning process that will reduce the impacts of climate change also create lots of other benefits for the Austin community. So by reducing less CO2 by driving, we also end up saving money, creating less air pollution. So it's a much bigger and more complex sort of change process than just worrying about tons of CO2. So I've talked about this creation of this plan a lot. What was done to create this plan? In June of 2014, we basically kicked off the initiative to create the plan. The Office of Sustainability kind of led the effort. We had a steering committee that was created. The steering committee is made up of about 20 individuals from our community that are very knowledgeable in environmental and climate change kind of issues. The steering committee met every other week from June through, we have our last steering committee meeting this Wednesday. So basically for 9 months, they met, every other week, they met about 15, 20 times, 2 hours each time to discuss issues, discuss drafts, discuss versions of things, and sort of guide the process. The other thing that we did was we had these technical advisory groups. So based on those 4 major sectors of emissions, we had sort of a team that was focused on creating the plan, creating the portion of the plan that was focused on those efforts. So the 4 technical advisory groups were electricity and natural gas, transportation, materials management, and then industrial process. So those folks were not only city employees, but also members of the community who care about these issues and are knowledgeable about the topics. So they were working within their own working group to create sort of the subsets of the plan. So as we worked through this whole planning process, we ended up coming up with sort of major strategy areas within these 4 sectors. So the sort of sub-bullets under each one of these are the sub-bullet of the types of actions that fall within the plan. So if you can imagine, and the full version of this plan is online right now for review and comment. So you can see here, so like with materials management. Within materials management, the major action sort of groupings were organics diversion, purchasing, methane management, recycling, and reduction and reuse. And then within each one of those, so within reduction and reuse, there are, I don't know what it is, 15 different actions that are listed. So some of the actions are things the community would do. Some of the things are actions that the city would do. Some are things that the businesses would do. Sort of rounds out the types of things that would need to be implemented and action taken in order to support getting to net zero emissions. So within transportation, because that's sort of the theme of the day, the 6 focus areas of the plan were infrastructure and service, land use, demand management, policy and planning, vehicles and fuel efficiency, and then economic and pricing systems. because we realize there's a lot of different factors that affect whether you get in your car or not and how far you drive to go somewhere. So we hit on every single angle of the problem of emissions from vehicles. So just briefly, I'm not going to go in full detail in all these. I'm just going to go through sort of some of these sub-actions within these six areas. So the first one, infrastructure and service. The main things that we're focusing on within infrastructure and service, these are mostly city and Cap Metro kind of focused actions. So continue planning efforts to get to a high-capacity transit system, whether that's bus or train or whatever it is. Increased mobility and safety, so things like speed limits, roundabouts, bicycle detection, traffic signal changes, anything around just getting people through our transportation system. Then the third one is expanded and extended transit service to suburban areas, because we realize that while a lot of people are moving to the central city, the people living in the suburbs live in those houses. They're going to live in those houses in 30 years. So figuring out solutions that work for residents in all parts of the city is important. Land use. Land use is a big one, and it's a big thing that the city affects. We have the Imagine Austin plan, which is adopted by City Council and which sort of leads us in the direction of land use. The other big thing that's going on right now is Code Next. They're revising the land use code, so to guide new development and how new development is built and where it's built. So things like prioritizing mixed-use development, integrating places with transit, promoting growth within activity centers so people stay closer, living closer to their work and where they shop. Pedestrian and bicycle-friendly districts, so more and more focus on getting people just out of cars and walking and biking. Affordable housing connected to transit options. The next section is transportation demand management. So this is the whole realm of activities about trying to guide when people are on the roads. As we know, we have a big-time traffic problem in Austin, and a lot of that is just about when people are driving. If you noticed, when was it? The Good Friday, which was just last Friday. There was almost no, if you were on the road at 8 a.m. on that Friday, there was almost nobody on the road. There was no traffic. And that's an example of just shifting the demand for transportation services. That a typical Friday, there's traffic jams. Just pick your road, there's a traffic jam. But AISD was canceled or didn't have school that day. A lot of people stayed home and didn't have work, and the next thing you know, there's no traffic. So activities like working with large employers to implement trip reduction programs, prioritizing public transit, increasing bicycle and pedestrian mode share, working with commuters on first and last mile connections. That's a big thing for people who use public transportation. It doesn't always exactly go directly to your house or directly to your work, but it likely goes within a mile of it, so helping people figure out how to get to the bus, and then if you get somewhere, how to get from the bus to your actual workspace. Working with event promoters, more and more education and outreach to fleet owners, more amenities and incentives for things like showers and workspaces, and then more and more incentive programs to try to get people out of single occupancy vehicles. So the last three sections were sort of getting to more of the vehicle focus, so policy and planning, so more and more connection around policies and planning for transportation. Vehicles and fuel efficiency, so more and more focus on incentives for electric and alternative fuel vehicles for not only fleet owners, but also individual owners, as well as charger-ready parking, so potentially having parking for people who plug in their vehicles. And then the final thing there is pursuing a fair market value for parking through demand-based commodity pricing. Any way that you can sort of incentivize or disincentivize parking can also help get people out of vehicles. So that's just a high-level summary of sort of the nitty-gritty and the details that are in this transportation section portion of the plan. So as I stated, vehicles and fuel efficiency is one of the primary focus areas of the transportation section. And where we recognize that we have a really, really large fleet of gasoline-powered vehicles in our community right now. We're hoping in 35 years from now, most of those vehicles are not running on gasoline, and that people are either not taking trips because you don't need to take a trip because you can walk or bike, but if you have to take a trip, that you're using public transportation or you're using a renewably powered electric vehicle. So that's a big change. There are, I think, over 800,000 passenger cars and trucks registered in the Travis County area, and over 99% of those are gasoline and diesel powered. So that's a big change to go from 99% one way to 99% the other way. So luckily Austin Energy has realized that this is an opportunity and has been promoting the adoption of electric vehicles in the Austin community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of their initiatives and their sort of first steps to get us moving in that direction. I drive an electric vehicle. I have a Nissan Leaf. It's fantastic. So the first thing is this is the growth of electric vehicles in our community. As I said, we know that over 99% of the vehicles are gasoline and diesel powered in our community, but that is changing quickly. So this is, it's hard to read here, but the far left is 2011. The far right is like the fall of 2014, so almost to the present. So this is monthly additions of electric vehicles to the community. The light blue at the bottom is the Chevy Volt. The orange is the Nissan Leaf. The yellow is the Tesla. The blue is the Ford Energy. And then I'm not sure what's at the top, but it makes a pretty small portion. But as you can see, that's a good upward trend. We are adding more and more electric vehicles to our community, and this is, individual residents buying these vehicles. These are forecasts for growth of electric vehicles in our community. As of just this past December, we're probably now over 2,000 electric vehicles in our community. These are three different forecasts for how we might grow the number of electric vehicles through 2020. So we're kind of on the number that where we are right now is on the lowest number, which would lead us to 10,000 within the next 5 years. But some of the higher estimates, if there are more pricing incentives, if there are more vehicle options that come out, we might be more on hopefully we can get to the higher trajectory, which would get us to 37,000 electric vehicles by 2020. So Austin Energy is doing the homework and trying to plan out how are they going to have the infrastructure available, how are they going to have the energy available, how are all these vehicles going to fit in with the electric grid and work. These are growth in charging in the Austin Energy plug-in vehicle charging system. So the plug-in everywhere system, which there's stations all around downtown. There's one at the Central Market just right over here. So these are the stations where you pay $50 a year for basically access to the network, and then you can charge any amount you want as long as you have access to those stations. So the number of charging events as well as the amount of energy used through the charging system, public charging system, continues to grow and grow, which is good. The key policy decisions, this is important because Austin Energy created this slide, and this is their sort of direction and focus. So they're trying to keep pricing low, keep it affordable and simple. Operating a battery electric vehicle like the Leaf is far and away cheaper than operating a gasoline vehicle, so they're trying to continue to perpetuate that. Focusing on green and renewable energy to be used in those vehicles. When electric vehicles came out, there's a lot of sort of discussion about, well, if you're charging electric vehicles with coal power, you're not really reducing emissions. Austin Energy sees that in no way, shape, or form as a thing they want to focus on. They want to focus on using solar and wind renewable energy to power vehicles. Parking and rebates, again, just more incentives to try to get people to make the switch. Supporting research and regional initiatives. This is really in its infancy. If we were having this conversation 5 years ago, almost none of those cars would be out in that parking lot, and there were no battery electric vehicles that were available for purchase. It's come a long way in just 5 years, but the more and more that we can support research and sort of pushing the envelope, we'll get there faster. There's a lot of federal grants in this area. Department of Energy is putting a lot of money out there for communities to help support the growth of electric vehicles, so engaging in that. And then finally, having this larger community vision to support. So having electric vehicles as part of a community climate plan that our city council supports as citywide policy and direction is key to help people understand going in this direction as a community. These are a little bit hard to read. These are just some of the specific areas that Austin Energy is working to implement in the next couple of years. Just some of the highlights: more and more public charging stations. So more and more of those stations that you see are going to be out there in the community. They're also going to be moving to a big challenge right now is if you live in a multifamily building, if you live in an apartment complex, it's hard to have an electric vehicle because most of those complexes don't put up the money to put in charging stations. They may have electrical outlets, but you're not supposed to use them. So Austin Energy is trying to work with multifamily housing to get more and more access to charging infrastructure for multifamily housing. More focus on, let's see, what are some of the other things here? More incentives and teaming with auto dealers. More and more rebates for home charging systems, so trying to support making it simpler and easier for people to plug in their cars at home. More and more, another big thing that folks may have heard of is the smart grid connection of an electric vehicle with as like battery backup for the grid. That's not something that currently is possible to do, but there's more and more research in that area. So when we're in a peak time, when it's in the middle of July and the grid is stressed, it's possible that we could have cars plugged in and then Austin Energy could pull power from cars to offset emissions from power plants. That's an area that needs a lot more focus and research. Let's see. Okay, so that's the summary of Austin Energy activities, and then the final piece here is the city vehicle fleet. So you may know or may not know, the city of Austin employs about 12,000 people. That's if you include Austin Energy, Austin Water, all the departments, parks, public works, everybody. We employ about 12,000 people. We have over 5,000 vehicles in the city vehicle fleet. So that's everything from heavy-duty vehicles to EMS and fire to police cars to garbage trucks to lots of light and medium-duty cars. So as you can see here, over 1,000 police cars that the city operates, over 160 solid waste packers that pick up our trash and recycling, over 247 EMS fire vehicles. One of the big pieces that many folks forget about is large heavy-duty and off-road vehicles. So the city has over 1,400 like large dump trucks, semi-trucks, pieces of backhoes and loaders to make the roads and do all the public works sort of activity. And then we have about 2,400 regular cars and trucks that are used for just city employees to get around. So that's a lot of vehicles. And the challenge with trying to work with the city vehicle fleet is that the battery electric vehicles that we see out in that parking lot are single passenger vehicles, small vehicles, sedans, and those would only fit a pretty small subset of the needs of the city. They don't have battery-powered dump trucks yet, and they don't have battery-powered police cars. But we hope that they're going to get there, and we hope that they're moving in that direction. So the strategies that we implement within the city fleet has to be a much more diverse solution than just focusing on like one thing. So, hybrid school buses, just like we have out there. Let's see. So the last thing, or I guess some of the last couple slides here are the city vehicle fleet teamed up with the Office of Sustainability to have a carbon neutral plan for our fleet. That's one of the goals that we have as that was passed by City Council. So some of the goals within that plan are 95% of our new vehicles would be alternatively fueled or hybrid vehicles. So they're making a concerted effort to make sure that the brand new vehicles we buy are the best options. Some of those vehicles are dual fueled vehicles, so they can run on biodiesel or can run on ethanol or can run on compressed natural gas. So making sure that dual fuel vehicles actually use the dual fuel. City employees are a wide, diverse set of people, and making sure everybody's trained and knows what to do is important. growing the amount of alternative fuels purchased by the city, whether it's electricity or biodiesel or whatever it is. Training city staff who use vehicles. It's really important to train people on not idling their vehicle. How you operate a vehicle can swing the efficiency of that vehicle by up to 5 to 10%, whether you're slamming on the gas or driving lightly. So making sure that people are trained is key. And then goals specifically at reducing greenhouse gas emissions per year and increasing miles per gallon of the city fleet per year. So our office works with fleet services and the departments to implement programs to help them reach these targets, and then we measure progress and sort of every year feedback with them on how they're doing and what they can do better. So just a very quick highlight, some of the progress that's been made so far is that 71% of those 5,000 vehicles are either alternative fuel capable or hybrid electric. We have over 250 hybrids. Most of those are Toyota Priuses. Over 300 vehicles that run on propane. Over 1,300 vehicles that can run on E85 ethanol. Almost all of our diesel vehicles can run on B20 biodiesel. A bunch of compressed natural gas units, and then about 40 electric vehicles within the city vehicle fleet. So we've got a long way to go, and it's going to be challenging to meet all of these different needs within the city vehicle fleet. But they're engaged, and we're trying to make progress. So next steps in conclusion on this whole plan. So the Austin Community Climate Plan isn't a plan that sort of has strong directives and directs draconian change in our community. It's meant to team up with transportation plans, energy plans, waste plans, to sort of support and provide direction and move our departments and our city council in the direction of getting to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So it's meant to interact and move back and forth with these. So these last couple slides are the recommendations and sort of the executive summary top-level suggestion of what's in that community climate plan. So the first thing is we've identified 9 different areas that need to be focused on immediately. So 3 actions in electricity and natural gas, 3 actions in transportation and land use, and then 3 actions in materials management. I highlighted 2 in red because 2 of these directly connect to supporting electric vehicles and supporting more and more research around how electric vehicles can connect with the electric grid. So those are 2 of the main things that we can focus on now, which the earlier we get started, the more benefits we can reap long term. These are just 9. We have over, I don't know what the final count is, 50, 60, 80 actions that are proposed in this plan. So number 2 is to develop a detailed implementation plan for the remaining phase 1 actions. So within the rest of those actions that are in this plan, come up with actual assignments, who's going to manage the projects, what are the budgets going to be, get those proposals in front of the city council and city management so money can be spent and action can be taken to actually get us to reducing these emissions. Number 3 is determine the feasibility of a carbon impact statement for major city council decisions. It's hard for city council to know. You know, city council is approving all of the major expenditures that the city's spending taxpayer dollars on. And if they don't understand, is this action going to make emissions go up or down? It's hard for them to know on a day-to-day basis when they're looking at 10, 50, 100 actions on their council agenda. It's hard for them to know which ones are actually going to create more emissions or less emissions. So educating decision makers on this is important. The 4th one there is determining the feasibility of a local carbon investment and trading program. There's a cap and trade program in the state of California. The whole concept of reducing emissions in one place and then trading those emissions to someone in another place is an interesting concept that's been brought up by a lot of members participating in this process. We're not really sure how that would work or if it would work, but studying it is key. And then 5 is continuing climate resilience planning efforts. So as I said in the very beginning, whether or not we are successful at reducing emissions or not, the climate has already begun to change and is going to continue to change. So making sure that our infrastructure is resilient, making sure that our communities are resilient, making sure that we are prepared to deal with droughts, prepared to deal with high temperatures, and are prepared to be successful in in a future with a changed climate. So, in conclusion, for the whole thing, transportation is a major focus area of climate initiatives. There tends to be a lot of focus on Austin Energy and on our power generation mix, but transportation is the number two thing, and we are all guilty of driving gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles. So avoiding trips, walking or biking whenever you can, taking public transportation, or using renewably powered electric vehicles are real ways that we can all reduce emissions. There tends to be, there's a lot of focus in local government about zoning and about the growth of our city because it's happened so fast. And while density is important, and focusing on density is a strategy to help reduce emissions, the suburbs aren't going away. People live in Lakeway and South and North and Cedar Park, and people live all over the place, and people have to, right now, the infrastructure is built for people to drive between point A and point B. So we're going to have solutions that work for not only the central city, but also others. And then finally, just to, again, reinforce the point, electric vehicles have a huge role to play. We realize that people aren't going to be completely out of cars in 35 years. Home solar PV systems with electric vehicles is here right now. There are people in the Austin area that have solar panels on their house that charge a car, and they drive the car around in a cost-effective way. These are just regular people in our community. They're cheaper to operate right now. They're likely going to get more and more cheaper to operate than gasoline vehicles. And the other, a side benefit is that air quality issues likely become a thing of the past. So smog, PM emissions, things that affect young people, old people, air quality will likely just not really be an issue if you're not burning fossil fuels. So that's it.
Thank you, Zach. I know we have a lot of questions. Raise your hands high. Douglas Bauer.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I wanted you to comment a little more about the source of electricity used for battery-powered electric vehicles. Obviously, if the source of electricity is generated by, like, say, coal or some other means that generates a lot of CO2, it's hard to say how that's helping the environment. So could you comment on where it comes from now locally and where we're going?
So right now, I can't remember what the exact percentage is. I think Austin Energy is at about 20 or 25% renewable energy for what's just delivered just through regular lines. The generation that was just passed in December, it's moving towards, it's not finalized yet, but they're moving towards a goal of 55% renewable energy by 2025. So Austin Energy is definitely moving. So if you're just using regular electricity from your house and you're not a Green Choice subscriber, then there's some some fossil energy mixed in with that. Ways to fix that are if you have solar on your house, then you're definitely using renewable energy. If you're a Green Choice customer and you're paying the additional penny per kilowatt hour to have Green Choice, then you're paying for renewable energy for your vehicle. The other thing sort of behind the scenes is in Texas, our percentage of renewable energy tends to grow at night because we have so much wind power, and the wind tends to blow at night. So if you, and it's just also a good idea to not strain the grid. If you have an electric vehicle, if you can, charge it during the night, in the middle of the night, and then you're not stressing the grid, and you're likely getting a higher percentage of renewable energy to power it. So it's key.
We have a question from Ham Richards. Would you stand, please?
Yeah, very interesting talk. Very interesting program, too. I'm interested in what sort of resistance, active and passive, you all have encountered in formulating and promulgating these plans.
Yeah. You hear about anti-climate change movement a lot in the news. In Austin, I don't hear about it a lot on a day-to-day basis, so I don't get hate mail about being supporting initiatives that reduce our impact on climate change. There is the resistance and challenges that we do feel are within the city bureaucracy and within the community. If you talk to some experts say we need to reduce emissions drastically within the next 5 to 10 years. And change is hard, the whole process. And then when you look at the process of, people changing, it's hard. So a lot of the resistance we have is about the speed of implementation and how quickly and aggressively you move on things. So there's always kind of the feeling of, whoa, slow down. Like, how about we do that in 2 years or 5 years? Like, not next year. So there's always the need to sort of only go as fast as people are prepared to go, which is frustrating for a lot of our environmental stakeholders who want it to happen really quickly. I want it to happen quickly, but we have to realize that if we scare people off or make people angry, that they're not going to change at all. So.
We have a question from Pat Beulah, one of our active forum committee members.
Thanks for being here. Have you heard an update on when the independent study will be returned so that we have the information of whether or not we want to go with a gas plant versus more solar and energy efficiency, et cetera?
I do not know. I think that she's referencing as part of the generation planning process for Austin Energy. Two things are happening. They're putting out a request for proposal for a large amount of solar energy, 600 megawatts of solar energy, to try to figure out the cost of implementing that much solar. And then they're also, one of the things that was proposed in the plant was to close the Fayette Power project, to close the Decker Power Plant, but then build a brand new 500 megawatt natural gas-fired power plant. There's a study that's being done about the economics of that and of the water and emissions and just the whole proposal. I think I'm not sure if they've even hired the consultant yet. Hopefully they have hired the consultant, and I imagine the project will take a couple months, and then they'll end up delivering a study. So I think they have due dates that it needs to be done by this fall or something. So I have not been directly involved, though.
We have a question from Michael Walsh.
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. My question has to do with, I'm going to say a really bad word here. I'm going to say carbon tax. But I was wondering how far the city's authority might, or the county's authority to, we have gas at under $2 a gallon right now. Mm-hmm. And certainly, all these programs could benefit from having additional funding. Mm-hmm. And what a better way to do that than possibly having a tax on local gasoline stations or other carbon sources. And so if you could speak to that, thank you.
Yeah. I certainly think it's a great idea, but I think it's kind of above my pay grade. The challenge is, the things that I've heard raised when you talk about like a local carbon tax are, the challenge with the state of Texas, so how our local government would then start bumping into state of Texas legislature issues, and whether that would be a positive. It would probably not be a positive interaction because our state relies so heavily on oil and gas revenues to operate. The other thing that I've heard, and this is just what I've heard, is that in terms of economic competitiveness, it wouldn't be viewed as the best thing. Because if we had a tax, like say it was just Travis County, but then Williamson County didn't have a carbon tax, you would essentially be pushing people to just move to Williamson County. And so you would have to have sort of the right boundary for it to work, because otherwise, if you're going to make things expensive in one place and not the other, you may just be sort of pushing things around. So I think the closest thing in California, it's not a carbon tax, it's a cap and trade system, but their boundary is the whole state of California, which is big enough to sort of keep things within the boundary.
We have a question from Jacek Bruce.
Okay, so in 2013, I was reading the newspaper, and it was talking about there was going to be a composting law for all Austin restaurants. By 2016, that's mandated they compost all their food scraps. I haven't heard of any updates, so I am curious. And also, following up on that question, do you really think people would move if there was a carbon tax? I mean, isn't that what we need? Because Travis County is like the most kind of liberal place and progressive in that sense.
Yeah. So the second one, people may move, people may not move. I think part of the challenge too is like the business angle of it, is that if we have large businesses that would be affected by it, those large businesses may they would potentially move out. I think a lot of that is just caught up in like political, the political realm. So it's about who's supporting who and what benefits who. So, I mean, it's above my pay grade. In terms of organics diversion, I know that organics diversion from restaurants is part of what's called the Universal Recycling Ordinance. And I know that there's a phased implementation process for the Universal Recycling Ordinance. I'm not familiar with what the actual due dates are, but I know it's a multi-year process, and I know that I've seen graphs where it stretches out to 2016 and 17 and 18. So I'm not sure.
We have a question from Russell Eskew.
Hi. If I were an environmental engineer, I would think I would be making a difference by producing oxygen or preventing ozone from the atmosphere, or by doing something to counteract extreme climate change. Is this better than conservation?
I think it's definitely part of the solution. You know, the more trees and the more active ecosystem that we have to pull down carbon out of the atmosphere, it's just another thing that supports reducing emissions. All this effort is on the emission sources just because the emissions are so large. But both are definitely important. I didn't talk a lot about trees or ecosystems or how that affects things, but it plays a very important role.
We have a question from John Franks.
One of the issues with EVs is charging time. Are they looking at installing a large amount of level 3 chargers? And California legislates cool roofs for new roofing. Is Austin doing anything in that area?
Cool roofs, I'm not sure what the actual code rules are. I know in the Austin Energy Green Building Program, if you're in a building that is following that rating system and getting points for green building, I know that it's part of that. So there are some incentives around it. In terms of charging times, I haven't seen, and in the actions from Austin Energy, I don't think that they're necessarily promoting putting in level 3 charging systems. And I think it's just right now the cost is so high that I'm not sure how much they cost, but you could definitely get many of the level 2 or level 1 charging stations, or just get one level 3. I think the other research that they've done a lot of research about consumer behavior and how people use electric vehicles and how people use vehicles in general, and it's really interesting when you look at 24 hours in a day. I think most people use a vehicle 1 hour out of the 24 hours, and so the vast majority of time vehicles are parked, whether it's at your home or at your work. So as long as people sort of think proactively about it for normal day-to-day operation, like within a city, as long as you're not thinking about like the long-range issues of like driving to Dallas or driving to Houston, for most people, your car is parked more than enough to get enough charge without having to have fast charge. So I think that's sort of what the research has shown them right now. But certainly for to get to Houston or to get to Dallas or to have a system equal to gasoline-powered cars, we would have to have a lot more level 3.
We have about 4 minutes left. We have a question from Michael Danowski.
Thank you for your presentation today. I have a question about some of the recent press about the state government and the governor. It appears that are opposing city ordinances that certainly the city of Austin's involved in, such as the bag ordinance, and I'm wondering if the city is formulating an official response to that to make sure that hopefully they're not successful in their efforts.
Yeah, I haven't participated in those processes, but I know that so the city has an office that focuses on the legislature. So they have a couple of attorneys that their job is to like follow what the legislature is doing and proactively try to address those issues. I know that it's been brought up. I think the mayor actually was I remember seeing, I think, in a press conference with mayors of other Texas cities all standing up together and defending home rule and defending local policies. So, yes, it's definitely on the agenda.
We have a question from Douglas Bauer, about 3 minutes left.
Thank you. When you were talking about the vehicles used by the City of Austin, you mentioned that a number of them were compatible with alternative fuels or biodiesel. Now, from my way of thinking, biodiesel generates CO2. Biodiesel consumes a lot of fossil fuels are consumed while growing and producing it. How does this help the situation with global warming?
So it's a really good question, and it is, I think the answer is that Department of Energy and like National Renewable Energy Laboratory research shows that biofuels like biodiesel have lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions than traditional fossil. That's what the research shows. So I certainly don't think that biodiesel is the answer. I don't think ethanol is the answer. I don't think biofuels in general are the answer. But right now, it's better than doing nothing. Just continuing to purchase diesel and gasoline with not trying to diversify at all, I don't think is the best approach.
I think we can squeeze in one last quick question.
Great.
Ham Richards?
Thank you. This is another technology question. The issue of range concerns me a bit. Electric vehicles' storage capacities are still pretty small in terms of miles between charges, and charging takes considerably longer than filling a gas tank. So for long trips, where do we stand with hydrogen? The advantages of hydrogen are that it can be generated anywhere you have sunlight and water. There's no distribution system necessary. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you should be able to fill the tank pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. I don't know a lot about hydrogen. I think all of it just comes down to economics. Is that right now they can cost effectively put the size of battery that they can in a vehicle, and that's cheaper than hydrogen infrastructure or hydrogen vehicles, and so that's sort of made its way to the forefront faster. I know that battery sizes and charging technology is continuing to evolve quickly, and the more vehicles that are out there and the more support that there is, the more research there will be. So, it will be really interesting to see 35 years from now if in 2050 we actually have a lot of electric vehicles or a lot of hydrogen vehicles or both or a lot of some other kind of vehicle, because that may happen too. So it should be interesting.
Well, thank you for putting us on a forward-looking path, and we hope we can modify our behavior accordingly. So it's been a great talk. Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, thank you very much.